Hello, greetings, my fellow from homesteaders, and welcome to another iteration of the Jewish Homesteading Project. This will be an audio iteration due to concerns about uploading and spotty internet, which is a common homesteading problem, and we'll continue with that sort of format until a better internet situation gives us the ability to produce more videos. As always, we are here to do our best to keep you on the derech and off the grid. Today we're just going to talk a little bit about homesteading, what that means, and what Jewish and specifically religious Jewish homesteading might eventually lead to. I'll start off with the word homesteading. Some of you may not have heard of it before. Homesteading is basically the idea of people inhabiting private farms in their sort of familial group and living there, producing their own things. Wikipedia likes to add a lot about how it's sort of different from a commune, and it's very bent on subsistence agriculture. I also like to add the fact that it's not a commune, it's not a village necessarily. It's the idea that people would be self-sufficient, and I think self-sufficiency is a big part of homesteading. The history of homesteading of course, goes back as far as people, from the first time when God told Adam that he would work the ground and grow his own food. Obviously, homesteading also has a lot of biblical connections too, because the agricultural society that the biblical stories took place in. But homesteading it's been around forever. It's been a thing. Not always was it allowed. A lot of times the land would be owned by the government or by barons or people like that. Like in the Middle Ages with the serfs is a good example, where people wouldn't have their own land. They would just be farming on someone else's land. But homesteading really became a big movement, at least in the Western world, as an idea of homesteading with the Homestead Act. And that was a series of laws that were passed in the 1860s. And basically what they encouraged was that the government had a lot of land that was open and sort of empty. And they wanted people to go out there and get in that land, build something, inhabit the land, make something out of it, sort of build it up. And so they allowed people to go out and claim free land as long as they kept certain terms and conditions, as long as they were citizens. And it wasn't just free land for anybody, but it was pretty easy for a lot of people to get land. And even women could apply for it, according to something I just saw on here. So it wasn't this idea of like it's the gentry class doing whatever. It was an idea for the basic man. Could go out, they could get something, they could get some land, they could farm it, they could try to make their own way for themselves in the world. Self-sufficiency is something which is very tied to the act of homesteading. Homesteading normally conjures these ideas of people out in the farm, and they have this little farm, they have chickens, they have some plants they're growing, they're eating their own food and stuff like that. And self-sufficiency is a big part of homesteading, and the face that homesteading has and the shape that it's taken in the world today. Self-sufficiency, if you haven't heard of that one, is it's an idea of people taking care of themselves in as many ways as possible, or in as many ways as they choose. Now, some people might sort of smirk at that and say, well, everybody takes care of themselves pretty much nowadays, but that's not necessarily true. We rely on heavily, not just rely, we really heavily rely in modern American society, and in modern, I would say almost all modern society, on, definitely in the first world at least, on these huge systems of support. The water that comes to our house comes through a massive pipe system normally. The power that we get comes from a massive electricity grid. The internet that you all listen to this on comes through a vast array of computers across the world and satellites. And it's not really something that we could do by ourselves a lot of the time. Well, self-sufficiency is the idea of providing as much as you can, or maybe all that you need, for yourself. So that would be the idea of growing your own food, the idea of making your own clothes, the idea of defending yourself, the idea of providing your own education, providing for your own entertainment, something which unfortunately a lot of people can't do these days. Self-sufficiency is this idea of taking care of yourself, being responsible for yourself, being responsible for your family. And that goes into a lot of other things that we'll eventually be discussing with regards to preparedness and with things which I think lead into responsibility. And someone who's truly responsible for themselves is someone who is in many ways self-sufficient, even if self-sufficiency isn't one of their main concerns. I'd like to get into a little bit of why now I've started this group and why I think this is a time that this particular idea needs to be pushed. And I think that as society changes, we have a lot of interesting ideas that are out. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of community that can be had without in-person meetings, as I'm sure the whole coronavirus era has taught a lot of us. There's so much ability. We're blessed with so much information and so much ability to gather information with the internet and with the modern printing and all of the systems that we have. It's really phenomenal, and it's never really existed to such an extent in the world. A lot of times for homesteaders, one of the big obstacles would be the feelings of remoteness. The idea that you were sort of on your own, and if anything went wrong or anything catastrophic might occur, that could really be the end. It was really survival on a day-to-day basis. I know if you've ever read some of the accounts of early homesteaders back in the 1800s in America, they had some pretty tough lives. They could get sick, they could get injured, and there would be no one to help them. And that was a huge risk that you took every day in life. Well, nowadays, we don't have to struggle with a lot of those risks. If there's an emergency, we can call for help. We have cell phones, we have walkie-talkies, we have radios, we have communications where we can gather with other people. We have cars, we can travel over long distances to help each other, to make communities. We can do so much more, and there's so much of an easier path than a lot of people had in the past. Now, we also have our struggles. Particularly today, one of our main struggles is that a lot of these skills that were so intrinsic in homesteading and that people really took as part of the core for their daily lives have been lost in a lot of ways. Now, not totally lost, many of them, they're just not as well known. They're sort of forgotten by the majority of people. But we can sort of overcome that barrier by using all those information gathering abilities that we now have, like the internet and like, well-printed books, like communicating with people who know, to sort of bridge that gap. So also right now in society, there's sort of a purveyance that a lot of people are growing up very sensitive. They're growing up very, I don't want to say weak necessarily, but sort of lacking in self-confidence. A lot of people feel like they have to constantly go out and they have to be loud and scream about who they are, and they have to seek validation from every company and every government. Everyone has to agree with everything they say and validate it all the time. Well, one thing about being self-sufficient, about being a homesteader, is when you realize that you can make your own food or your own clothes or protect yourself, you realize that you don't need a lot of that external validation, and that you're not sort of one of what a lot of people nowadays are calling snowflakes. You're not one of these people who are, constantly offended by everything that goes on around them. You sort of have your situation going on, and you're okay with that. And in a lot of ways, Jews have been like that for a long time. Jews have sort of been like, okay, we don't need you to come out and everybody to worship our religion. We don't need you to, accept God the way we do, or God at all. We're just fine over here by ourselves existing. Thank you very much. And I think that's something that people are going to find more and more as this insecure culture of people forcing everyone to accept everything they believe in. I think more people are going to find that the things there's some places when they agree with them, it might be convenient, but a lot of times when you don't agree with them, it can become very inconvenient. And I think homesteading and getting people out in a place where they're going to continue to be able to make their own choices about things, whether that be schooling, whether that be religious practices, especially concerning the way we eat. There's certain authorities on a ben schita nowadays. Homesteading is a way to sort of be more self-reliant in that way, and like I said before, not being as cut off as that would have meant in the past. Also nowadays, I'm sure, as we all know how we've been affected by lockdowns, by different government agencies shutting down anything from locking people in their absolute homes all the way down to just restricting certain businesses or certain operating times or things like that. It's not fun. It's not fun to be stuck in the city in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 kids, and everybody's screaming and wants to go out, and the kids are losing it because they're out of their schedule and they don't know what to think, and the parents don't know what to think, and everyone's sort of kind of trying to do as best they can, some better than others. I've seen it, at least, that the kids who are in places where they have a yard, where they have hobbies, where they have things they can do outside of school, where they have something that's meaningful, it's a lot of times night and day. When you see kids running around playing, having fun, like they did last summer when people went up from New York City to their bungalows and things, you saw places where kids were finally being cooped up in tiny apartments in the city forever, and now they got out and they have a place to run around and be human again. That was a great thing. And I think in a world which, unfortunately, I don't think the lockdowns are going to end anytime soon, and I think certain restrictions are always going to remain, it's a very high standard of living to be able to give to your family the ability to say, well, we're going to go outside and we're going to go for a walk and we're going to do something, even if it's not going to the movies and the mall and all these other concepts of whatever anyone might have done for fun before. The idea that you can say, hey, we still have our own space, we can still go outside, we can still do things, we can still be productive, we're not trapped in here like rats, I think is also a big plus, and I think it's very good for people's mental health in times that put a lot of strain, a lot of stress on especially kids and also adults. So there's that too. The next thing I want to point out here is there's not a lot of from homesteaders. Part of the reason that I sort of started this group is because I've been meeting people who are interested in homesteading or aspects of self-sufficiency and homesteading, at least parts of it. If that be just growing your own food, or if that's an interest in defending themselves or whatever, and they would kind of say, there's really nobody else who's religious who's into this. And I've had people tell me, they'd say, Monty, you're the only one that's thinks like we do about these things. Who else? Do you know anybody else that is interested in these things? And I found that I did know people. I live in upstate New York, what a lot of New York City people at least call upstate New York. I don't know if everybody in New York calls southeastern New York upstate New York, but I know a lot of people up here, and they are interested in one or two of these things or all of them, and they have a lot of similar interest, even if it's just but they like to live in a small town away from the hustle and bustle of the city and like to make more of their own choices. Even if it's something so tiny as that, there are a lot of people that are into a lot of different things and for a lot of different reasons that all fit under the homesteading umbrella and the self-sufficiency umbrella. And I was looking around, I'm like, well, why isn't there some sort of organized group? Maybe there's somebody that has a farm out somewhere and they have something going on. And there are from people that have farms. And I see that more and more of them are they're kind of out there by themselves. And not to put that down, if that's what they need and that's what works out for them and their family, Shalom Yisrael, they should have Atzlacha. But there was no sort of group of people saying, hey, let's all kind of, live around each other and do all this sort of stuff. It was just people who happen to live near each other and happen to be kind of up in the country all year round. Okay, you have friends and we kind of do redneck stuff up here. Well, I thought that it was really a lacking in that, a lacking of a group for homesteading people, for people who want to be self-sufficient, that was also religious and had an emphasis on Frumkeit and the challenges that Frumkeit presents to some of these ways of living and how some of that can be overcome. And just a family of people that could talk about this and sort of people who feel the same way and make a connection in a community. So that's kind of why I've started this here. But that sort of begs the question, why isn't there a group like this already? Why aren't there a bunch of From Homesteaders? Why don't we just see, there's group A, B, and C, and we can kind of pick whoever we want? Well, part of it is that the current Jewish system is very, very centralized. There's a lot of emphasis on mostos, and you have these certain community groups and a lot of the ways the Jewish people would pull together, and they would open things like JCCs and schools and shuls, and they would build community out of this, which is great. That's all fine and dandy. But if it's not for everybody, and if it's, nowadays in a situation where you don't have to live directly in, this specific area to send your kid to that school. You might live in this part of town and send your kid all the way over there. You might go to this shul, even though you have to walk 30 minutes to get there, as opposed to the one that's down the street, because you feel with that community. You might go to one shul and daven during the week and one shul on Shabbos, because that's just the way modern from life is becoming more and more. And especially now at schools and the whole, telecommuting and Zooming and all these video call systems, a lot of people are going to school over the internet, and particularly with Chabad's thing, where they actually, if you want to talk about an isolated Jewish family, that's a Chabad shliach. Chabad has a whole system where they teach kids over the internet, and they do like these online classes for all the children of the shluchim. So up until now, there haven't been a lot of these resources around in the past. I would say definitely in the past 20 years, and I think now is the time when there can be sort of an explosion of this. And it's not like we're the first people that have ever been Jewish and interested in agriculture. I mean, the Bible is very clear, in the Torah it says that each person would have a certain amount of land, and there's countless different mitzvahs that have to do with the agricultural practices, about raising animals, about raising crops, about tithing, meiser, about the different way, shechita, about all this sort of stuff that has a very physical and very agricultural root to it. And there's a lot of language in the Torah about agriculturalism, about living in an agricultural way. A lot of the brachos that are given, a lot of talk about different fruits and vegetables, all the different 7 species that the land of Israel was blessed with, and all this sort of stuff. And that doesn't mean that every ancient Hebrew was a homesteader, but definitely there was an agricultural aspect to life, and that isn't present now. So, if you feel inspired and moved by that, that might be one of the reasons that you're here. Of course, there's a lot of other from difficulties in homesteading that my hope and goal is to get to all of those over the course of my life, and as long as I'm connected to the group here. So that'll be a topic that we'll be coming back to hopefully in every video and at the end of everything. There's a lot of resources out there for people who aren't religious in homestead. There's a lot of people who have been homesteading for their entire lives and know everything a lot better than I do. But I think the unique thing that we bring to the table in our community is that we're from community who does it, and they're from challenges. A great example of one of those would be a conversation I was having with a friend on Shabbos, and I was talking to him about a wood-burning stove. And back when people didn't have electricity, if you didn't have an electric system to mitigate your heat issues and you lived in a cold climate, what would you do on Shabbos? So you put in 5 or 6 logs, you sit them there, they burn down. Okay, that night, everything's great. Daven Kabbalah Shabbos, come home, eat your meal, everybody's warm in the whole house. And then it comes to the next day, and what did they do? Were they just cold all day? Was the cholent cold? Like, okay, you insulate it, you put it in the stove, you try to keep it as warm as you can. But so you're gonna get up, you're gonna go to davening, you're gonna come back, and you're gonna eat like lukewarm cholent, and the rest of everybody else in the house is bundled up in coats and they're freezing? No, they must have had a solution. People had a solution, and they had a system for doing it. And there's definitely ways to be from and to face these challenges. So when we do face these challenges, when we do find them, we always have to remember that there were people before us. They had a lot of knowledge, and we can rediscover that when we look back in our vast treasure of Jewish literature and find answers to a lot of these things. So hopefully we'll be going through a lot of those answers and finding them together and discussing them, and modern ways to make things work, and also ancient ways to make things work that you'd have been practicing and serving Hashem with forever. So finally, the last point I'd like to draw out is that one of the goals of this group is not to be a giant mosh group where everybody has to hear about everything. Nowadays, we have the luxury of being able to tune in to certain aspects that we want, and to tune out to aspects that we don't. And obviously, I don't expect someone who's super concerned with self-defense to be super concerned with, raising small livestock, and I don't expect someone who's really interested in growing plants to also be really interested in business ideas and in financial systems. So I'd really like to make themes around certain things, discussions around certain things, and people certain things, and I'd like to bring in as many people as possible to get into the main page, and then from there we could branch off. We could have conversations and here and there. I'm still looking for the best medium as far as a website to do that, and it might end up being an internet forum on a website that I'll eventually pay for and host and everything. It might end up being a bunch of different WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups that are, and everybody just being part of the one big group, and then whatever other group they want to be part of as well. But I do encourage you to go ahead and like the video here, to go ahead and share it to friends if they're interested in it, and to go ahead and invite people to join the page. I mean, joining a page is literally a couple clicks. And if something happens and they decide they don't like it, they don't want it, they're not ready for it, they can always unfollow it. But yeah, invite your friends to join the page. Tell people who you know about this. Tell them about it. Let them get involved. Let them start producing content. Let them talk to us. Let them become part of the community. I'm not trying to run a one-man show where it's only me talking about my stuff and my thoughts and my, ideas. I want it to be everyone helping each other in, a beautiful way. Hopefully we can all be zeich of that and bring it off into a much bigger group and community.